everyone, and welcome back to Emily vs. Art. I'd like to introduce you to a subreddit I recently found called RedditGetsDrawn. Reddit is a website that is basically 4chan with usernames, but sometimes there are some really nice communities. Here in RedditGetsDrawn, users submit photos and then artists draw them. Simple as that. The moderators make sure that no one spams too much or posts joke drawings, and I've already been able to explore several different subjects for portraits. The point of this video is to show how this subreddit is great inspiration, but also that you should try to explore your artistic style, especially when practicing. So here, we're going to have two different styles with different workflows. First, a semi-realistic portrait with LineArt and not flat color, but not necessarily like super detailed realistic color. It's hard to describe. Most importantly, I use a grid system in order to make my drawing. Then I'm going to do a completely stylized portrait using mostly freehand sketching with some copy-pasted guidelines. So let's get right into it. First, we have You Are Dumb from Reddit, who posts on RedditGetsDrawn. I thought that it would be a great opportunity to practice using a grid when drawing. I already set it up, so you'll see here that I just turn on the layers with a reasonably symmetrical grid on the reference photo, and then I also add a few guidelines for some things that the grid doesn't exactly mark off super well. Then I start laying down a general outline of the hair and jawline using the grid as my guide. Again, I'm not trying to be hyper accurate, but I also want to make sure that the basic shapes are there. The eyes and facial features are honestly the most difficult part to get right. I often feel like the expressions on my sketches come out completely differently from my reference, and no matter what, I can't get it right. You'll see here that I also sometimes scribble in marks on both the sketch and the reference to see exactly where something goes, and even then, it won't necessarily be a perfect representation or duplication of your photo. After getting the basic shapes blocked in, I usually disable the grid and start working on details. The grid starts to be a little bit more distracting than helpful at that point. For example, I zoom in here to try and get the jewelry to be at least somewhat similar to the reference. Once I get started on the details, it pretty much just turns into a never-ending cycle of zoom, draw, erase. Eventually, I realize that this sketch isn't going to magically become perfect, so I select the area around my portrait, invert the selection, and fill in a new layer with a base color. I can now use the alpha clipping tool thingy on Krita to be a little bit lazier with my coloring, and stop fiddling with the particulars of the sketch at this point. So I literally just watched a tutorial from BAM Animation that explained why my line art method, called petting the line, is not actually very good. But for now, to explain what you're seeing on the screen, I'm using a pressure opacity brush and stroking repeatedly over the same line in order to build up weight. I can see now how this makes my lines look much less confident and clean, but it's going to be a process to eliminate this from my workflow. In the meantime, you can see that I'm trying to use different line weights for the outer edges, the hair, and the facial features. I think this gives the portrait much more life than plain flat lines, which were probably my biggest sin early on in my art career. Not that that doesn't work. If you look at most anime, the line weights are all the same. Same thing for Adventure Time or Steven Universe or Gravity Falls. It's just so much easier to animate as a team when all of the line weights are exactly the same. I learned that also from the BAM Animation tutorial. But I really do want to give a sense of form and shape with my lines and not just the colors in the end stage. Also, I don't show it here, but I'm occasionally enabling the grid layer and double checking my proportions because sometimes your little edits can add up to a very strange face. I then decide to start the coloring process on the hair using that alpha clipping feature. My initial layer wasn't very clean and I actually forgot to clean it up, so don't be like me, folks. Clean base layers make everything easier later. I'm just using the basic brush with no opacity sensitivity to make sure I get a good full layer of color down for each element. Next, I do the skin base color, and wow, in retrospect, this is way too pink and saturated. This is the danger of having a crappy laptop screen. Often I'll post to Instagram or somewhere else and say, wait, no, because the colors are much darker or more heavily saturated than I intended. Oh well. The easy solution is just to get a better computer or monitor, but that's also the expensive solution. The hard solution is to always check images on multiple devices before posting, but who has time for that? I also lay down the base colors for the eyes and lips here. This makes the whole thing look a lot better in my opinion. The eyeball could have been lighter, though the reference pic has a dark shadow on the eyes. Here, it looks a little demonic. After my base colors are all down, I start getting in there with some real paint brushes. I lay down the basic tones for shadow and highlight on the skin. Nothing fancy, nothing perfectly realistic, but a lot better than my previous weird airbrush attempts. I like to use the wet brushes that can also carry color in Krita, because if I press hard, I can add color and smear it around, but if I press lightly, I can just smear stuff with a wash of color at the most. Very versatile. Also, I hate doing lips. Every time I add a little detail, I feel like they start looking like some sort of weird puckering alien butthole. I managed to get this looking at least semi-natural, and then I move on as fast as possible to the eyes. I noticed here that my line art was incredibly sloppy, and so I spent a significant amount of time redrawing it. This is really important. I may seem lazy and like I'll leave some rough stuff in, but if something looks really out of place, don't be afraid to take the time to correct it. Though I do think eyes are more important than hair strands. I also add the pupils inside the iris. Don't forget to add the shadow at the top of the iris. This makes the eye just look so much more realistic, and it's why stylized eyes from anime to regular Disney cartoons often include that dark curve at the top even when it's not attempting realism. Also, the hair is absolutely my favorite part. I love adding big blocks of highlight and shadow and then going wild with a wet bristled brush. As I mentioned in my Drawing a Sexy Girl Doing Nothing video, this can create apparently hyper-detailed hair strands with almost no work. Yay, shortcuts. And now for my new favorite trick in the digital art handbook. By grouping a blank layer with my line art and using that previously mentioned alpha clipping feature, I can now apply colors over my line art without altering the original layer at all. This means I can lighten the lip colors, add variation to the hair, and then change my mind in an instant. So here's the final version of my portrait of the Reddit user, You Are Dumb. I want to thank her for sharing her photo on the internet and allowing me to include her in my video. And now we are on to a Reddit user called Emma Darling, and here I was a little bit tired of the realistic style that I have been doing for the past few days just out of practice. And so I decided to go for something a little more stylized, something a little more cartoony. And so as you can see here, I made a first sketch attempt, which wasn't so bad. I put it up in the corner, saved it, but I wanted to keep trying. And then my second and my third, I really felt like they just weren't hitting something for me. Maybe they were too thin or pointy and I couldn't get the shapes where I wanted them, so I did cheat a little and laid down some guidelines for the jawline and where the eyebrows and the eyes and the nose would hit, and then just move that on over to use it as a base for a sketch. And then, of course, I finally am able to get busy with my free drawing. When I'm done, I move it up top and get ready to do some combination magic. Basically, I really like both sketches, but I'd love something in the middle. Using onion skins while animating has taught me the beauty of drawing something literally in the middle of two sketches or keyframes, and so that's why I decide to overlay both sketches and work with that. I also end up using the transform tool a little bit in order to get the overall proportions and angle right, but I think it was a pretty good freestyle drawing, even with all the tricks and shortcuts I used. I kind of hate how the right bun looks as well, so I end up copying and pasting the left bun and just adjusting it so it looks about right. Since it's on a separate layer, I'm then able to erase the original bun underneath until it blends together pretty well. Moving on from the sketch phase, now we're into line art, and this is where you see how petting the line really looks. My line art is rough, scratchy, with bumps and hairs everywhere. It takes me several tries to get it even close to where I want it. I'm going to have some serious line studies in my future in order to improve my tablet drawing skills, and there's no real shortcut to good lines, but there are certainly ways to practice. I'll link to the tutorial from BAM Animation I keep mentioning in the description below. Also, I'm once again trying to use varying line weight to give the image a little more visual interest. The hair is very thin, as hair tends to be, while the jaw, eyes, and eyebrows are much thicker and more pronounced. I also wanted the mouth to be a pretty big feature, but I end up letting the color do most of the work there. Then I follow the exact same process as in the first portrait. I select the outside of the figure, then invert the selection and fill a new layer with a base color. I decided that this image would be done best with a flat color style rather than the semi-realistic style I tried with Huh, You Are Dumb. I wanted the lines and the simplistic colors to do most of the talking, where shadow and form are implied rather than explicitly stated. That sounds super smart, but mostly I just wanted to do a more stylistic portrait because realism is really hard and I was tired. So finally, here's the final portrait. Why the hearts? I don't know. Why is she looking in a different direction? I don't know. Honestly, in the end, I just highly recommend the RedditGetsDrawn community for any artists looking for willing subjects of all kinds. It's comforting to know the portrait you nabbed off the internet is from someone who wanted it to be there. Whenever I steal something from Google Images that isn't a stock photo, I feel like a bit of a voyeur. Who said I could use this photo of a tender moment between mother and child? Well, on RedditGetsDrawn, the mother probably did. They also have good rules about not adding sexual elements unless the submitting user requests it, which is kind of reassuring. Also, I've done the following portraits for this community, and as you can see, I've been using it as an opportunity to practice different art styles, just as I show in this video. There's no reason you have to settle on an art style, whether that means a certain type of line art or a particular coloring process, in order to grow and develop as an artist. Yeah, the big artists on the internet are pretty recognizable just from their work alone. Yeah, in the end, most art-related jobs do want consistency from their employee, but if you're in my shoes and you're just trying to get something out there for the sake of personal growth, then by God, don't limit yourself right out of the gate. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed seeing a couple of different styles that I've been exploring. Not necessarily hyper different, but different enough that I thought you guys might be interested in seeing my process. Thank you so much, and in the end, have a great one.